You think you know the person you married? Think again. James Sterling was absolutely certain he held all the cards. He was the CEO, the visionary, the man with the millions. To him, his wife Isabella was just a quiet, dependent accessory he was ready to discard for a younger model. He thought he could bully her into a penny-pinching settlement. But when the courtroom doors swung open on the final day of the trial, James didn't just lose his money, he lost his reality. Because Isabella wasn't who he thought she was. And the family walking through those doors, they didn't just hire lawyers, they owned the law. This is the brutal, satisfying story of how a billionaire in disguise taught a cheating husband the ultimate lesson in humility. Date October 14th, 2025. Location, Superior Court of California, San Francisco County, Department 404, Case Sterling, Vial. Sterling. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom buzzed with a low, irritating hum that seemed to match the headache throbbing behind James Sterling's temples. He checked his Rolex Submariner for the third time in 5 minutes. He was a busy man. As the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a mid-sized but rapidly growing tech logistics firm in Silicon Valley, his time was worth approximately $500 a minute. Spending 3 days in this drab wood-paneled room fighting over scraps with a woman who hadn't earned a dime in 6 years felt like a personal insult. He glanced to his left. Sitting at the plaintiff's table was his lawyer, Richard Cross. Cross was the kind of attorney you hired when you wanted to scorch the earth, a man who wore 3-piece suits that cost more than most people's cars and smelled of expensive cologne and aggression. "Relax, James," Cross whispered, not looking up from his notes. "We have her cornered. The prenup is shaky, sure, but with the forensic accounting we've presented, she looks like a financial liability. We'll get you out of this with the assets intact. You'll be a free man by lunch." James smirked and leaned back in his leather chair. He looked across the aisle. There sat Isabella, his wife of 6 years. She looked small. She was wearing a grey cardigan that looked like it had been through the wash too many times, and a simple black skirt. Her hair, a dark chestnut brown, was pulled back in a severe, unflattering bun. She wasn't wearing any makeup. She looked tired, defeated. God, how did I ever find her attractive? James thought a cruel sneer touching his lips. When he had met her 7 years ago, Isabella had been a waitress at a diner in Palo Alto called The Griddle. She had been sweet, attentive, and seemingly awestruck by his ambition. At the time, James was just starting Sterling Dynamics. He liked having someone who looked up to him. Someone who made him feel like a titan, even when he was operating out of a rented garage. He liked that she was an orphan, no messy in-laws, no family drama, just her. But now he was a titan for real. He needed a woman who fit the part. A woman like Tiffany. He felt a vibration in his pocket. He subtly slid his phone out. A text from Tiffany Rose. "Are you free yet, baby? I have that table at Nobu reserved for 100 p.m. Don't let her drag this out. XOXO." James typed back quickly. "Almost done. The shark is about to eat her alive." "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The Honorable Judge Lydia Banks swept into the room. She was a stern woman with a reputation for efficiency. She didn't like drama, and she definitely didn't like time wasters. "Be seated," Judge Banks said, adjusting her glasses. "We are back on the record in the matter of Sterling v. Sterling. Mr. Cross, you may continue your cross-examination of the respondent." Isabella stood up slowly. She walked to the witness stand with her head down. She looked terrifyingly fragile. Her lawyer, a court-appointed disaster named Mr. Arthur Abernathy, shuffled his papers nervously. Abernathy was wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too big and had a mustard stain on the lapel. James had almost laughed out loud when he saw who Isabella had retained. It was like watching a pit bull prepare to fight a ham sandwich. "Mrs. Sterling." Richard Cross began pacing in front of the stand like a predator. "Let's revisit your contributions to the marital assets. In the last 4 years, have you held any employment?" "No," Isabella said softly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Speak up, please," Judge Banks commanded. "No, I haven't," Isabella repeated louder this time, but her voice shook. And during the founding years of Sterling Dynamics, Cross continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did you write any code? Did you secure any venture capital? Did you negotiate any contracts?" "No," Isabella said. "I managed the home. I supported James, emotionally." James snorted audibly from his table. Cross shot him a warning look, but smiled. "Emotionally," Cross repeated, as if tasting a rotten lemon. "So while Mr. Sterling was working 18-hour days, securing the contract with Global Logistics that made the company what it is today, you were, waiting at home?" "I was making sure he had a home to come back to," Isabella said, her eyes fixed on her hands. "And I helped in the beginning. I gave him the initial seed money." Cross laughed. It was a practiced theatrical laugh. "Seed money. You were a waitress, Mrs. Sterling. We have the records. You transferred $10,000 from a savings account. $10,000. Sterling Dynamics is now valued at $45 million. Do you think $10,000 entitles you to half of that?" "It was all I had," Isabella said. "It was a drop in the ocean," Cross snapped. "Your Honor, the plaintiff posits that Mrs. Sterling's contribution was negligible. We are offering a generous settlement of $100,000 and spousal support of $3,000 a month for 2 years. Given her lack of skills and education, this is more than charity. It is a gift." James watched Isabella. He expected tears. He expected screaming. That's what Tiffany would have done. But Isabella just sat there. She looked up, and for a split second, James thought he saw something in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It was pity, no, he told himself. She's in shock. She knows it's over. "Mr. Abernathy," the judge said, turning to Isabella's disheveled lawyer. "Do you have any redirect?" Mr. Abernathy stood up. He knocked over his own water cup, scrambling to catch it before it soaked his files. Yes. Yes, Your Honor. Just a few questions." James rolled his eyes. This was pathetic. Mr. Abernathy walked toward the witness stand. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like a confused history teacher. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Isabella. "Mrs. Sterling," Abernathy said, his voice surprisingly steady compared to his physical clumsiness. "Is it true that you have no family?" James frowned. Why bring that up to garner sympathy? Isabella paused. She looked directly at James. "That is what I told James when we met." "Why?" Abernathy asked. "Because," Isabella said, her voice gaining a strange, cool clarity, "I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for where I came from. I wanted to build a life with someone who didn't care about my last name." "And did Mr. Sterling care about your name?" "No," Isabella said. "He cared that I was quiet. He cared that I was convenient. And eventually he cared that I was easy to discard. "Objection!" Cross shouted. "Relevance. This is a divorce trial, not a therapy session." "Sustained," Judge Banks said. "Move it along counsel." "Mrs. Sterling," Abernathy continued, "Mr. Cross claims you contributed nothing to the company's success beyond a negligible $10,000. Is that accurate?" "James believes it is accurate," Isabella said. "And the initial investor," Abernathy asked, "the angel who provided the $2 million in Series A funding that actually launched the company in 2021, the one James refers to as the ghost because he never met them face to face." James froze. How did Abernathy know about the ghost? That was confidential company information. The Series A funding had come through a blind trust in Switzerland called Aurora Holdings. James had never known who was behind it, only that the money had saved his neck when he was about to go bankrupt. "Yes," Isabella said. "I know about the angel." "Who was the angel, Mrs. Sterling?" Isabella's gaze didn't waver. "I was." Silence descended on the courtroom. Absolute, suffocating silence. Then James burst out laughing. He couldn't help it. It was a guttural, mocking laugh that echoed off the walls. "You," James shouted, standing up. "You put in $2 million. You clipped coupons for groceries. Bella, you drove a 2015 Honda Civic. You expect the judge to believe you had $2 million sitting in a Swiss bank account." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling." Judge Banks banged her gavel. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt." James sat down, still shaking his head, a smug grin plastered on his face. "She's delusional," he whispered to Cross. "She's actually lost her mind." Cross stood up. "Your Honor, this is perjury. Unless Mrs. Sterling can produce documentation proving she is the beneficiary of Aurora Holdings, I ask that this testimony be stricken." "We have documentation," Abernathy said. He reached into his messy briefcase and pulled out a thick blue folder. It wasn't paper-clipped. It was bound in leather. "And we also have witnesses." "Witnesses?" Judge Banks asked, looking at her docket. "I have no other witnesses listed for the defense." "They just arrived," Abernathy said, checking his watch. "They are outside now. I beg the court's indulgence. It pertains to the financial disclosures Mr. Sterling submitted to this court, specifically the assets he failed to disclose." James's smile faltered. Assets he failed to disclose. He had hidden $3 million in a shell company in the Cayman Islands. He had done it carefully. His accountant assured him it was untraceable. "This is highly irregular," Judge Banks said, frowning. "It is your honor," Abernathy agreed, "but if you grant me 5 minutes, I promise you the integrity of this court will be preserved, and Mr. Sterling's memory might be refreshed." Judge Banks looked at Isabella. Isabella sat like a statue, her posture suddenly regal, the slouch gone. 5 minutes, Judge Banks said. "Court is in recess." James leaned over to Cross. "What is she doing? Who is coming?" "I don't know," Cross said, looking uneasy for the first time. "But she can't be Aurora Holdings. That fund is handled by the Caldwell Group. That's old money. East Coast steel and banking money. There is no way your waitress wife is connected to them." James relaxed. "Exactly. She's bluffing. She's trying to scare me into a higher settlement." The double doors at the back of the courtroom opened. James turned around, expecting to see perhaps a forensic accountant or maybe a disgruntled ex-employee Isabella had dug up. Instead, 2 men in black suits walked in. They were security. They held the doors open. Then an older man walked in. He was tall, with silver hair, and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He wore a suit that James recognized instantly, bespoke Savile Row, likely costing upwards of $20,000. He walked with a cane, but he didn't lean on it. He used it like a scepter. Behind him walked a younger man, perhaps 30, with the same sharp jawline and cold, calculating eyes. The air in the room seemed to get thinner. James felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He recognized the older man, not from real life, but from the pages of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. It was Alistair Caldwell, the patriarch of the Caldwell dynasty, one of the wealthiest men in New York, a man who owned shipping lines, real estate empires, and banks. Why is Alistair Caldwell in my divorce hearing? James looked at Isabella. Isabella stood up. She didn't look at James. She looked at the old man. "Hello, Daddy," she said. The courtroom gasped. Even the court reporter stopped typing. James felt the blood drain from his face. His hands went numb. Daddy Alistair Caldwell stopped in the middle of the aisle. He looked at James Sterling with a look of utter, terrifying indifference, the way a human looks at a cockroach before stepping on it. Then he looked at Isabella. His hard face softened just a fraction. "Isabella," Alistair said. His voice was deep, resonant, and commanded absolute authority. "You've had your fun playing house. Are you ready to finish this?" "Yes," Isabella said. "I'm ready." Mr. Abernathy, the clumsy lawyer, suddenly straightened his tie. He smiled at James, a sharp, predatory smile that revealed he hadn't been clumsy at all. It had been an act. "Your Honor," Abernathy said, his voice booming now, "I would like to introduce my co-counsel representing the Caldwell Family Trust, which holds the controlling interest in Sterling Dynamics, Mr. Liam Caldwell." The younger man stepped forward and placed a heavy briefcase on the defense table. James looked at Cross. Cross was pale. He was closing his laptop. "You didn't tell me," Cross hissed at James. "You didn't tell me she was a Caldwell." "I didn't know," James whispered, his voice cracking. "She said she was from Ohio. She said her parents died in a car crash." "She lied," Cross said, staring at the billionaire family assembling on the other side of the aisle. "And God help us, you fell for it." Isabella turned to James. The mousy, tired housewife was gone. In her place was a woman with ice in her veins. She offered him a small, cold smile. "You wanted a fight, James?" she said softly, so only he could hear. "You wanted to count pennies. So let's count them. All of them." The silence in Department 404 was shattered by the sound of Liam Caldwell snapping open the latches of his briefcase. It sounded like 2 gunshots in the quiet room. Judge Banks, usually a paragon of composure, took a moment to clean her glasses. She looked from the billionaire patriarch, Alistair Caldwell, sitting stoically in the gallery, like a king holding court to the shivering figure of James Sterling. "Mr. Abernathy," Judge Banks said, her voice tight. "You mentioned a change in representation." "Yes, Your Honor," Abernathy said, stepping aside with a deferential bow. "I'm stepping down as lead counsel. Mr. Liam Caldwell is admitted to the bar in California and will be taking over Mrs. Sterling's excuse me. Ms. Caldwell's representation effective immediately." Liam Caldwell stood up. He was terrifyingly handsome, but in a way that suggested he would smile while foreclosing on an orphanage. He buttoned his suit jacket, a charcoal grey Tom Ford that fit him like a second skin. "Thank you, Your Honor," Liam said. His voice was smooth, polished, and carried a distinctive East Coast cadence. "We apologize for the theatrics. However, given the fraudulent nature of the plaintiff's financial disclosures, my family felt it necessary to intervene personally to protect our assets." "Object," Richard Cross started to say. but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat. Objection. My client has not committed fraud. That remains to be seen, Judge Banks said, leaning forward. Mr. Caldwell, you mentioned the angel investor. Yes, Liam said. He walked over to the plaintiff's table and dropped a heavy document in front of James. Exhibit C, the original incorporation papers of Sterling Dynamics, Clause 14, Section B. James looked down at the paper. His hands were shaking so badly the text blurred. He remembered signing this. It was 5 years ago. He was desperate. The prototype wasn't working, the rent was due, and he had maxed out 3 credit cards. Isabella had come to him one night, saying she had found an investor online who helped startups. She handled the paperwork. He just signed where she pointed. Read it, James, Liam urged gently. Or would you like me to summarize? James couldn't speak. His throat felt like it was filled with sand. Clause 14 states, Liam recited from memory, turning to the judge, that Aurora Holdings retains 51% controlling interest in Sterling Dynamics until the principal loan of $2 million is repaid with 15% annual interest. Furthermore, Clause 14, Section D, the bad faith clause, stipulates that if the CEO engages in embezzlement, fraud, or misrepresentation of company funds, all remaining equity held by the CEO immediately reverts to Aurora Holdings. I repaid the loan, James stammered, looking at his lawyer. Richard, tell them we repaid the $2 million last year. Richard Cross looked through his files frantically. We have a wire transfer receipt. October 2024. $2.4 million sent to Aurora Holdings. Yes, you sent the money. Liam agreed. He walked back to his table and picked up a single sheet of paper. But you didn't send it from your profits, James. You didn't send it from your salary. Liam held the paper up for the court to see. You sent it from the Cayman account. James felt the room spin. The account you failed to disclose in this divorce hearing. Liam continued, his voice hardening. The account holding $3 million. But here is the problem, James. That money in the Cayman account, it wasn't yours. Isabella spoke up for the first time since her family arrived. She was still sitting in the witness stand, her hands folded calmly in her lap. It was vendor kickbacks, James, she said softly. James whipped his head around. Shut up, he screamed. Mr. Sterling, Judge Banks shouted. Sit down. Isabella continued unfazed. For 3 years, you inflated the shipping contracts with Global Logistics. You overcharged your own company by 20% and had the vendors funnel the difference into the Cayman Shell Corporation. You were stealing from Sterling Dynamics to pay off the debt you owed to start Sterling Dynamics. That is speculation, Cross yelled, though he was sweating profusely. It is forensic fact, Liam countered. We have the bank records. We have the affidavits from the vendors at Global Logistics, who, by the way, were very eager to cooperate once the Caldwell Group threatened to blacklist them from every major port in North America. Liam turned to the judge. Your Honor, James Sterling didn't just hide assets from his wife. He embezzled funds from a company majority owned by the Caldwell Trust. Under the bad faith clause, James Sterling no longer owns 49% of the company. He owns 0%. He is not a CEO. He is an employee who has been caught stealing. James slumped in his chair. It wasn't possible. This was a nightmare. Isabella, his quiet mousie. Isabella, who clipped coupons for pasta sauce, had been watching him steal for 3 years. She had been collecting evidence. Why? James whispered, staring at her. Why did you wait? If you knew, why didn't you stop me? Isabella looked at him. Her brown eyes, usually so warm and submissive, were now dark pools of indifference. "I wanted to give you a chance to be honest," she said. "I gave you the divorce papers 6 months ago. I asked for a clean break. I asked for half of the marital home and my car. That was it. I didn't ask for the company. I didn't ask for your millions." She leaned into the microphone. "But you got greedy, James. You tried to leave me with nothing. You hired Mr. Cross to humiliate me. You mocked me for being a waitress. You called me a burden." Isabella stood up. She looked tall. She looked like a Caldwell. "You thought I was powerless because I chose to be kind," she said. "You mistook silence for weakness. So I called my father, and I told him you were ready to be taught a lesson." Richard Cross closed his laptop with a snap. He stood up. "Your Honor," Cross said, his face pale, "I request a recess. I need to consult with my client regarding his potential criminal exposure." "Criminal?" James grabbed Cross's arm. "What do you mean, criminal?" "Embezzlement is a federal crime, James," Cross hissed, pulling his arm away. "And fraud in a court of law is another. You didn't tell me you were laundering money. I'm a shark, James, not a magician. You're on your own." "Recess granted," Judge Banks said, banging the gavel. "We reconvene at 1:30 p.m. And Mr. Sterling, I suggest you don't leave the building." James stumbled out of the courtroom into the hallway. The air in the corridor felt cooler, but he was burning up. He loosened his tie, gasping for breath. He needed to think. He needed a plan. He had millions stashed away. Wait, no. The Cayman account was compromised. Liam knew about it. If they froze that he had nothing. His liquid cash was tied up in the house, and the car's assets that were now frozen by the court. He pulled out his phone. He had to call his offshore banker. "James." A high-pitched, cheerful voice grated against his ears. He looked up. Walking down the courthouse hallway, clicking loudly in red-bottomed stilettos, was Tiffany Rose. She was wearing a white dress that was far too short for a courthouse and carrying a massive designer bag. She looked like a walking Instagram filter. "Tiffany," James hissed, looking around wildly. "What are you doing here? I told you to wait at the restaurant." Tiffany pouted, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I got bored, baby." "And you said you'd be done by noon. It's 12:15. I came to pick you up. Did you crush her? Is the mouse crying?" James tried to push her away, but his hands were trembling. "Tiffany, listen to me. You have to leave now." "Why?" Tiffany laughed, pulling back. Did she make a scene? Oh, I hope she made a scene. I love it when they get desperate. Just then, the double doors of Department 404 opened again. Isabella walked out. She was flanked on one side by Liam and on the other by Alistair. 4 large security guards formed a protective phalanx around them. They moved with a synchronized grace that screamed power. Tiffany blinked. She looked at Isabella, then at the men in suits, then back at Isabella. "Is that her?" Tiffany sneered, her voice carrying down the hallway. "That's the ex-God James, you were right. She dresses like a librarian who gave up on life." James squeezed his eyes shut. "Shut up, Tiffany. For the love of God, shut up." Isabella stopped. She didn't look angry. She looked at Tiffany with a mild curiosity, like a scientist observing a new strain of bacteria. Alistair Caldwell stopped too. He leaned on his cane and looked at Tiffany. "And who might this be?" Alistair asked, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "I'm his fiancée," Tiffany declared, flashing a diamond ring that James had bought with money from the company account. "Who are you?" "Her grandpa," The hallway went dead silent. Even the passing clerks stopped walking. Liam Caldwell let out a dry, sharp chuckle. "Grandpa, that's rich." Isabella took a step toward Tiffany. The security guards shifted to let her pass. "Tiffany Rose," Isabella said. Age 24. Failed fitness influencer. Currently unemployed, living in a condo in the Marina district, paid for by Sterling Dynamics under the guise of consulting fees. Tiffany's jaw dropped. "How do you know that?" "Because I own the company that pays your rent," Isabella said calmly. Tiffany laughed nervously. "You're broke." "James said you were a charity case." "James lied," Isabella said. She turned her gaze to James. "James lies about a lot of things. He told you he was rich. He told you he was the CEO. He told you he was free." Isabella took another step. "As of 20 minutes ago, James is unemployed. His assets are frozen. The condo you live in? It's company property. I'm having the locks changed within the hour. The car you drove here, the Porsche Macan, it's leased under the company name. The repo men are likely towing it from the parking lot as we speak." You can't do that," Tiffany shrieked. She looked at James. "James, tell her she's lying." James leaned against the wall, covering his face with his hands. "It's true, Tiff. It's all gone." Tiffany looked at James, horror dawning on her face. It wasn't horror for him. It was horror for herself. The meal ticket was cancelled. "You loser!" Tiffany screamed, hitting James in the chest with her handbag. "You told me you were worth $50 million. I wasted 8 months on you." "Ms. Rose," Liam interrupted, checking his watch. "I'd advise you to stop assaulting the defendant. The FBI is on their way to pick him up, and they might decide to take you in as an accessory to embezzlement if you don't disappear very, very quickly." Tiffany went pale. She looked at the diamond ring on her finger. "Give it back," Isabella said. "What?" Tiffany clutched her hand to her chest. "The ring," Isabella said. "It was bought with stolen funds. It's evidence. Hand it over to Liam, or we add grand larceny to your list of problems." Tiffany frantically yanked the ring off her finger and threw it at Liam, who caught it effortlessly with one hand. She didn't even look at James. She turned and ran down the hallway, her heels clicking frantically until she disappeared around the corner. James slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. He looked up at Isabella. "Are you happy?" he croaked. "You ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything, James," Isabella said, looking down at him. "I just turned on the lights." Alistair stepped forward. He looked at the broken man on the floor. "You had a gem," Alistair said, gesturing to his daughter. "A woman who loved you when you had nothing. A woman who brought you into a family that could have given you the world. If you had just been decent. If you had just been faithful." Alistair shook his head. "Come, Isabella. We have a board meeting. You have a company to restructure." "Wait," James pleaded, scrambling to his knees. "Bella, please. I can fix this. We can talk. The company needs me. I'm the face of Sterling Dynamics. The clients know me." Isabella paused. She looked back over her shoulder. "The clients know James Sterling," she said. "But James Sterling is a fraud. The company will be fine, James. I hired a new CEO this morning." James blinked. "Who?" "Me," Isabella said. She turned and walked away, the heels of her modest black shoes making a sound far more intimidating than Tiffany's stilettos ever could. James sat alone in the hallway. Down the corridor, the elevator dinged. 4 agents in windbreakers with FBI emblazoned on the back stepped out. They looked around, spotted James, and started walking toward him. James closed his eyes. But the story wasn't over. James Sterling was a narcissist, and narcissists don't go down without trying to burn the house down with them. He had one card left to play, a card he had kept hidden in a safe deposit box that not even Isabella knew about. It was a recording from inside the Caldwell home. As the agents handcuffed him, James smiled, a manic, desperate smile. "You want a war, Isabella," he thought. "Okay, let's see how Daddy likes it when his secrets come out." Date October 18th, 2025. Location, Federal Detention Center, Dublin, California. The orange jumpsuit was itchy. It smelled of industrial detergent and old sweat. James Sterling sat on the edge of his metal cot, staring at the concrete wall. 3 days. He had been in here for 3 days. His assets were frozen. His reputation was incinerated. The news cycle had been relentless. Tech CEO revealed as conman. The headlines screamed. The billionaire wife he never knew. He had been denied bail. The judge a different one this time, as Judge Banks had recused herself to be a witness in the fraud case, deemed him a flight risk. "Sterling," a guard barked, rapping his baton on the bars. "Lawyer." James stood up. A flicker of hope ignited in his chest. He shuffled to the visitation room, his wrists cuffed. Sitting behind the plexiglass wasn't a high-powered defense attorney. It was Morris Fletcher. Morris was a fixer James had kept on retainer for the dirty work, scrubbing bad reviews, intimidating disgruntled employees, and silencing the occasional mistress. Morris wore a cheap suit and looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. James picked up the phone. "Did you get it?" Morris nodded, looking nervous. He didn't pick up the phone. He just held up a small silver USB drive against the glass. James exhaled his breath, fogging the plastic. The insurance policy. 3 years ago, Isabella had taken James to a family gathering in the Hamptons. She had claimed it was for her distant uncle's retirement. James, always suspicious and always snooping for leverage, had planted a voice-activated recorder in the library, hoping to catch some gossip he could use to embarrass Isabella's relatives if they ever looked down on him. He hadn't caught gossip. He had caught Alistair Caldwell, Isabella's uncle, having a hushed, intense conversation with his head of security. James remembered the words perfectly. He had listened to them 1,000 times. "I don't care about the legality. Just bury it. Pay them whatever they want, but make sure the police report disappears. I want it gone by morning. If this gets out, it ruins everything." James didn't know what Alistair had buried. A body. A massive fraud. Toxic waste dumping. It didn't matter. It was proof that the high and mighty Alistair Caldwell was a criminal. It was obstruction of justice. It was a felony. "You know what to do," James whispered into the phone. "Go to Liam Caldwell. Tell him I want full immunity. I want my assets unfrozen. I want $10 million wired to an account in Switzerland. And I want Isabella to publicly apologize." "James," Morris said, his voice tinny through the receiver. "Are you sure these people, they aren't just rich, they're powerful. If we poke the bear is already eating me, Morris," James hissed. "Do it. Tell them if I don't walk out of here by tomorrow noon, that recording goes to the New York Times, the FBI, and TMZ. Alistair Caldwell will spend his twilight years in a cell right next to mine." Morris hesitated, then nodded. He pocketed the drive and stood up. James watched him leave. He leaned back in his chair, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Checkmate Isabella. Location, the Caldwell Estate, Pacific Heights. Time, 7:00 p.m. The atmosphere in the library was heavy. Rain lashed against the bay windows, overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. Alistair Caldwell sat in his leather armchair, a glass of scotch in his hand. Liam paced by the fireplace. Isabella stood by the window watching the storm. "He's bluffing," Liam said, tossing a manila envelope onto the coffee table. "Morris Fletcher came to my office an hour ago. He played a 10-second clip. He wants a deal." "What's on the tape, Liam?" Alistair asked calmly. He didn't look worried. He looked tired. "It's you, grandfather," Liam said, "from Christmas Eve 2019. You're telling Marcus to bury it and pay them off. You talk about making a police report disappear." Isabella froze. Her reflection in the dark window stared back at her, pale and wide-eyed. Christmas Eve 2019. She turned around, slowly. "Play it." Liam pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A grainy, amplified recording filled the room. "I don't care about the legality. Just bury it. Pay them whatever they want, but make sure the police report disappears. I want it gone by morning. If this gets out, it ruins everything." Alistair closed his eyes. He took a sip of his scotch. "I remember that night," Alistair said softly. "So do I," Isabella whispered. Her heart began to hammer in her chest. "It sounds bad." "Grandfather," Liam admitted. "To a jury that sounds like you're covering up a murder or a massive bribe. If James releases this, the DOJ will open an investigation. The stock price will tank. The board will force you to step down pending an inquiry." "We can't let him release it," Alistair said. "Not because of me, but because of who it protects." "He wants 10 million and freedom," Liam said. "Do we pay him?" "No," Isabella said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the gloom. Liam looked at her. "Bella, we don't have a choice. The optics—" "We have a choice," Isabella said. She walked over to the coffee table and looked at the phone. Anger, hot and righteous, flushed her cheeks. "James thinks he has a smoking gun. He thinks he's holding a knife to our throats." She looked at her father. Alistair met her gaze. There was a deep sadness in his eyes, but also a resolve. "He doesn't know, does he?" Isabella asked. "No," Alistair said. "He was too drunk that night to remember." Isabella picked up the envelope Morris Fletcher had left. "He wants a meeting?" Isabella asked. "He wants an answer by noon," Liam said. "Get me into the prison," Isabella said, her voice turning to steel. "I'm going to give him his answer." "Bella, you don't have to do this," Alistair said gently. "I can handle it. I can pay him." "You've paid enough for him, Daddy," Isabella said, her voice breaking slightly before she hardened it again. "You protected him because I loved him. You compromised your integrity because I begged you to save him. I won't let him use your kindness as a weapon against you." She grabbed her coat. "Liam, call the warden. Tell him the CEO of Sterling Dynamics is coming for a conjugal visit." Date, October 19th, 2025. Location, Federal Detention Center, Visitation Room B. James was waiting. He had shaved. He had combed his hair. He sat with the arrogance of a man who believes he has just won the lottery. When the door opened, he expected Liam with a check, or maybe Alistair looking defeated. Instead, Isabella walked in. She was alone. She wore a white power suit that made her glow against the drab grey walls of the prison. She carried nothing but a small tablet. She sat down opposite him. She didn't pick up the phone. She signaled the guard to unlock the pass-through slot. The guard, clearly instructed by higher powers, obliged and stepped out of the room. "Where's the money?" James asked, leaning forward. "Where's the release order?" "There is no money, James," Isabella said. Her voice was calm, conversational. And you aren't going anywhere." James laughed. "Did you listen to the tape? Your daddy is a criminal, Bella. Racketeering, bribery, obstruction of justice. If I release that the Caldwell name is mud, you really want to play chicken with me?" "I listened to the tape," Isabella said. "Christmas Eve, 2019, the Hamptons." "Exactly." James smirked. He was covering up something nasty. What was it? Did he have a rival killed? Did he dump chemicals in the ocean? Isabella placed the tablet on the table between them. "You really don't remember that night, do you?" she asked. "I remember I was bored." James shrugged. "I had a few drinks. I went to the library to read. That's when I heard it." "You had a few drinks," Isabella corrected. "James, you drank nearly a bottle of scotch. You insisted on driving back to the guest house to get your cigarettes. I tried to stop you. You pushed me." James frowned. A vague, hazy memory scratched at the back of his mind. The rain. The sleek black Jaguar. He had been driving Isabella's car. "I didn't drive," James said defensively. I stayed at the party." "You drove," Isabella said. "You took the Jaguar. You made it about 2 miles down the coast road. And then you hit something." James went cold. "You hit a minivan, James," Isabella said quietly. "It was parked on the shoulder, a family of 4 inside. They were changing a flat tire." James stared at her. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You didn't stop," Isabella continued. "You panicked. You drove away. You came back to the estate, the front of the Jaguar sashed in, crying, smelling of vomit and whiskey. You told me you thought you hit a deer. You were hysterical." Isabella tapped the tablet. A video file opened. It wasn't the audio James had. It was security footage from the Caldwell estate garage. On the screen, a younger James was stumbling out of a smashed Jaguar, collapsing into Isabella's arms. "I called my father," Isabella said. "I was terrified. I thought you were going to prison. I thought my husband's life was over. I begged him to help." She looked James dead in the eye. "That recording you have, that isn't Alistair covering up his crime. It's Alistair covering up yours." James shook his head. No, that's a lie." "The police report he mentioned making disappear," Isabella said. "It was the hit-and-run report, the payment he paid that family $2 million cash to not press charges and to sign a non-disclosure agreement. He paid for their medical bills. He paid for a new car. He bought their silence to save you." Isabella leaned in close. "My father committed a felony that night, James." "Yes. He obstructed justice. He bribed victims, but he didn't do it for profit. He did it because his daughter was crying on the floor, begging him to save her husband." James felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The memory was coming back now. The sickening crunch of metal. The headlights spinning. The terror. He had blocked it out. He had convinced himself it never happened. "If you release that tape," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "you aren't exposing Alistair. You are exposing yourself. Because we kept the evidence, James. We have the car. We have the paint transfer samples. We have the DNA from the airbag." She swiped on the tablet. A photo of the smashed Jaguar wrapped in plastic in a storage unit. "We kept it as insurance," she said, "in case you ever tried to hurt us. I never thought I'd have to use it. I thought you were just a bad husband, not a monster." James slumped back in his chair. He looked small, defeated. "So," Isabella said, standing up. "Go ahead. Call the New York Times. Play the tape. Tell them Alistair Caldwell covered up a crime. And when they ask whose crime it was, we will give them the full file. You're already looking at 10 years for embezzlement. Add felony hit and run, fleeing the scene, and DUI causing injury. You'll die in this prison, James. James looked at the USB drive on the table. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a suicide vest. "What do you want?" James whispered. "I want you to plead guilty," Isabella said, "to everything. The fraud, the embezzlement. You take the maximum sentence. You don't appeal. And you never, ever speak my name or my family's name again. And if I do, then I release the hit-and-run evidence to the district attorney," Isabella said, "and I make sure you get put in general population." She reached out and took the tablet back. "Goodbye, James. Enjoy the silence. You finally got what you wanted, a life where you don't have to work, and everyone knows your name." Isabella turned and walked toward the door. She didn't look back. James sat alone in the room. He looked at the reflection of himself in the dark glass. He had thought he was a king. He had thought he was the smartest man in the room. He realized now, too late, that he had never been the player. He had always been the pawn. Date, April 12th, 2026. Location, the Penthouse Office, Aurora Tech Headquarters. Formerly Sterling Dynamics, San Francisco. The view from the 42nd floor was breathtaking. The fog was rolling over the Golden Gate Bridge, a blanket of white obscuring the churning water below. Isabella Caldwell stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, sipping a cup of green tea. She wore a tailored navy blazer and silk trousers, an outfit that cost more than the entire wardrobe James had allowed her to own during their marriage. The office behind her had been purged. James's aggressive black leather furniture was gone, replaced by cream velvet and warm oak. The minibar where he had hidden his expensive scotch was removed, replaced by a bookshelf filled with legal texts and engineering journals. The air no longer smelled of his cologne. It smelled of fresh orchids and success. "Ms. Caldwell." Isabella turned. Her assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, whom James had fired 2 years ago for being too opinionated and whom Isabella had rehired immediately with a raise, stood in the doorway. "The board of directors is waiting," Sarah said. "And there is a delivery for you, from the mailroom. It was marked personal from the federal penitentiary." Isabella looked at the envelope in Sarah's hand. It was cheap, rough paper. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. She didn't need to open it to know what it said. It would be another plea, another beg for a visitation, another promise that he had changed, that he found God, that he was sorry. "Burn it," Isabella said calmly. Sarah blinked. You don't want to read it. I know the author," Isabella said, turning back to the window. "I don't like his style. Shred it, burn it, I don't care. Just make sure it never enters this room." "Understood," Sarah said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Oh, and one more thing. The rebranding team sent over the final mock-ups. The sign on the building is being changed as we speak." Isabella smiled. Sterling Dynamics was dead. The name that had been synonymous with fraud and arrogance had been scrubbed from every website, every letterhead, and every building. The company was now Aurora Tech, named after the shell company her grandmother had started 50 years ago. It was a nod to the women in her family, who built empires in silence, while men took the credit. "I'll be there in 5 minutes," Isabella said. As Sarah left, the door opened again. This time it wasn't an assistant. It was Alistair Caldwell. He looked older than he had in the courtroom. The stress of the last 6 months, the internal audits, the media circus, the quiet settlements with the SEC to clean up James's mess had taken a toll. But he still stood tall, leaning on his cane with the grace of a retired general. "You look like your mother," Alistair said, walking into the room. "I feel like her," Isabella replied. She walked over and kissed his cheek. "How is the retirement life treating you?" "Boring," Alistair grunted, sinking into one of the new armchairs. "I played golf yesterday. I hated it. I might buy a vineyard just to have something to yell at." Isabella laughed. It was a genuine sound, free of the anxiety that had plagued her for years. "I wanted to give you this," Alistair said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Isabella opened it. Inside was a simple, heavy gold signet ring. The Caldwell crest, a lion holding a key, was engraved on the face. "It was my father's," Alistair said, "and his father's before him. It usually goes to the eldest son. But Liam is good at the numbers, but he doesn't have the heart. You do." "Daddy, I can't," Isabella said, touched. "You saved this family, Isabella." Alistair said, his voice serious. "I spent my life thinking I had to protect you. I thought you were too soft for this world. That's why I let you marry that man. I thought you just wanted a simple life." He sighed, looking at his hands. "I was wrong. You weren't hiding because you were weak. You were hiding because you hadn't found your war yet. When the war came, you didn't just fight. You conquered." He pointed to the ring. "Put it on. You're the CEO of the family now." Isabella slid the ring onto her finger. It was heavy. It felt like responsibility. It felt like home. "Thank you," she whispered. "Now," Alistair said, tapping his cane on the floor. "Go to your meeting. I heard you're acquiring global logistics." Isabella grinned a shark-like grin that she had definitely inherited from him. "Hostile takeover. They tried to overcharge us during the transition. I decided it was cheaper to just buy the whole company and fire their VP of sales." Alistair threw his head back and laughed. "That's my girl. Give them hell." The aftermath. Isabella walked into the boardroom. 12 men and women in expensive suits stood up immediately. At the far end of the table, a large screen was displaying the news. Breaking news. Former tech CEO James Sterling sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Sterling, once the darling of Silicon Valley, wept openly as the sentence was read. In related news, Instagram model Tiffany Rose has been indicted on charges of receiving stolen property and tax evasion. Isabella picked up the remote and clicked the TV off. The room went silent. All eyes were on her. "Gentlemen, ladies," Isabella said, her voice clear and commanding. "That is the past. We don't look at the past at Aurora Tech. We look at the quarterly projections." She sat at the head of the table. "Item 1, she said, the expansion into the European market. Who has the numbers?" As the meeting began, Isabella glanced down at her hand. The gold signet ring caught the light. She thought about the woman she used to be. The waitress in the diner. The wife who cooked dinner and waited for a husband who never came home. The woman who made herself small so a fragile man could feel big. She felt a moment of pity for that woman, but she didn't miss her. She looked at the empty chair to her right. It was where James used to sit. "Actually," Isabella interrupted the CFO. "Before we start the Europe report, I have one personnel change." "Yes, Miss Caldwell. Remove that chair," Isabella said, pointing to James's old seat. "Remove it." "Yes," Isabella said, opening her file. "I don't need a co-pilot. I fly alone." The room was still for a second, and then a murmur of approval rippled through the board. The chair was wheeled away. Isabella Caldwell looked out at her team, at her company, at her life. She wasn't powerless. She never had been. She had just been sleeping. And now, finally, she was awake. And that is the story of how James Sterling learned the most expensive lesson of his life: never mistake silence for weakness. James is currently serving year 1 of his 15-year sentence, and rumor has it he's working in the prison laundry, finally learning how to wash his own clothes. As for Isabella, Aurora Tech just reported its highest quarterly earnings in history. She didn't just win the divorce, she won the war. It's a brutal reminder that in the game of life, the person holding the loudest microphone isn't always the one with the most power. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one sitting quietly in the corner, taking notes. If you enjoyed this story of supreme justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Have you ever been underestimated by someone only to prove them wrong later? I want to hear your stories. Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new episode of real-life drama and storytelling. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.